flight was supposed to be routine. Another business trip, another journey home. She sat quietly in first class, ignored by the other passengers. Then the flight attendant approached with that forced smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's been a seating change. You'll need to move to economy." The whispers followed her down the aisle. Someone snickered. "Guess she doesn't belong up here." She said nothing, just walked with quiet dignity to her new seat. They had no idea who she was. They had no way of knowing what was beneath her simple clothes. Until turbulence hit. Until that moment when her jacket shifted. Until they saw the gold Trident. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of hidden strength and quiet dignity, consider subscribing for more. Every warrior deserves recognition, even when they don't ask for it. The sunrise painted Baltimore's terminal windows amber as Lieutenant Commander Serene Everly watched passengers hurry past her gate. She sat apart from the crowds, her weathered hands moving methodically across the pages of a leather-bound journal. The careful, precise handwriting filled the margins with what appeared to be coordinates and terse observations. Dressed in simple civilian clothes, khaki pants, a navy button-down with sleeves rolled to the elbows, she was deliberately unremarkable. Only her posture suggested something different. Back straight, shoulders squared, eyes that periodically scanned exit points with practiced precision. A cluster of executives in tailored suits invaded the waiting area, their laughter cutting through the morning hush. The tallest among them, gesturing expansively while describing some business triumph, bumped Serene's shoulder without acknowledgement. She silently gathered her journal and single carry-on, a weathered tactical backpack with faded patches that had been deliberately removed, and relocated to a less crowded section of the gate. Without complaint, she repositioned herself with clear sightlines to all terminal exits. "Pre-boarding for first-class passengers will begin momentarily," announced the gate agent. Serene tucked her journal away and stood, moving toward the boarding line with the efficiency of someone accustomed to following protocols. The businessmen pushed past her to be first, their bodies forming a wall of expensive suits. She simply waited, eyes forward, expression neutral. "Boarding pass, please," said Melanie, a flight attendant whose practiced smile didn't reach her eyes this early in the shift. Serene handed over her pass without speaking. "First class is to your right, seat 3A, Melanie said mechanically, already looking past Serene to the next passenger. As Serene made her way down the jetway, she noticed Wesley Ashford, the tall executive from the terminal, watching her with unconcealed skepticism. His eyes traced her simple clothing, the worn backpack, the practical boots. His slight frown suggested she didn't match his concept of a first-class passenger. She stowed her bag in the overhead compartment with a single fluid movement, then settled into her window seat. Within moments, her breathing slowed and her eyes closed, though her posture remained alert. A resting state that wasn't quite sleep. The cabin gradually filled with passengers. A senior flight attendant named Jurgen moved through first class offering pre-flight beverages. He paused at Serene's row, tilting his head slightly. "Excuse me, miss, can I see your boarding pass again?" His tone was polite, but carried an edge of authority. Serene opened her eyes immediately, fully alert without the drowsy transition most passengers would display. She wordlessly produced her pass. Jurgen studied it longer than necessary. "There seems to be an issue with your seating assignment. Let me check with the purser." Across the aisle, Wesley exchanged glances with his colleague, eyebrows raised. The morning light caught Serene's profile as she gazed out the window, revealing a thin white scar along her jawline, nearly invisible unless caught by direct light. She touched it absently, a brief gesture of remembrance, before returning her attention to the cabin around her. The head purser Vanetta approached with tablet in hand, flanked by Jurgen and another attendant named Dominic. Her professional smile was firmly in place, but her eyes were cold. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's been a seating adjustment. We need to reassign you to economy." Vanetta's voice carried just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear. Serene's eyes moved deliberately around the cabin. No other first-class passengers were being approached. The section wasn't even full. "Is there a specific reason for this reassignment?" Serene asked, her voice quiet but clear. "It's a weight and balance issue," Vanetta responded without hesitation. "We need to redistribute passengers." From the aisle seat behind her, a businessman snorted audibly. Wesley leaned toward his colleague, whispering loud enough to be heard. "Guess they figured out she doesn't belong up here." Several passengers chuckled. One woman stared pointedly at Serene's worn boots. Serene stood in a single fluid motion, her face a careful mask of neutrality. No problem. She retrieved her bag with the same efficiency with which she'd stowed it, moving with the balanced precision of someone who has trained extensively in confined spaces. As she turned to follow Vanetta toward economy, she noticed a uniformed air marshal watching the interaction with a furrowed brow, the only person who seemed troubled by the situation. Serene walked toward economy with her back straight, the whispers and chuckles following her down the aisle. As she moved, her collar shifted slightly, revealing the edge of a small, fresh scar, precise and surgical in nature, just below her collarbone. The air marshal's eyes narrowed at the glimpse of the scar, something like recognition, flickering across his face. Economy class was already crowded, the narrow seats filled with passengers arranging their belongings. Vanetta gestured to a middle seat in row 14. "This will be your seat for today's flight," she said, the false warmth in her voice making the humiliation more acute. Serene nodded once and took her seat between an elderly woman who was already asleep against the window and a young man furiously typing on a laptop, her knees pressed against the seat in front of her, a stark contrast to the spacious first-class accommodation she'd paid for. As the safety demonstration began, Serene noticed Dominic watching her from the front of the economy cabin. Unlike Vanetta, his expression carried confusion rather than satisfaction. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly. The plane taxied toward the runway, engines rumbling beneath them. Serene closed her eyes, but her mind remained active, cataloging sounds and movements around her with practiced attention. This had not been the first time she'd been misjudged, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Beside her, the young man's typing paused. "They shouldn't have done that," he said quietly, nodding toward the front of the plane. Serene opened her eyes. "It happens." "Not right, though. You paid for that seat." She gave him a small nod but didn't engage further. Her attention shifted to the air marshal, who had chosen a seat with a direct line of sight to her. His casual observation wasn't casual at all. He was watching her specifically. The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing them back into their seats as it lifted into the morning sky. Serene's seatmate resumed his typing, fingers flying across the keyboard in a rhythm that suggested coding or extensive note-taking. Once they reached cruising altitude, Serene pulled out an unusual satellite phone, military issue, far more robust than typical consumer electronics. She checked it briefly, pressing a sequence of buttons that seemed to confirm something, then tucked it away. "Cool phone," the young man said. "Never seen one like that. I'm Kieran, by the way." "Serene," she replied, offering only her first name. "It's reliable." "You military or something?" he persisted, eyes bright with curiosity. Serene gave a non-committal shrug and closed her eyes, effectively ending the conversation. But through barely open lids, she observed the first-class cabin where Wesley and his colleagues were being served champagne, laughing about something that seemed to greatly amuse them. Her hand moved unconsciously to her collar, adjusting it to ensure the scar remained covered. The elderly woman beside her stirred, blinking in confusion. "Are we there yet?" she asked, her voice fragile. "Not yet," Serene replied gently. "We've just reached cruising altitude, about 2 hours to go." The woman nodded, struggling to open a small pill container. Her arthritic fingers couldn't manage the child-proof cap. Wordlessly, Serene took the container, opened it with practiced ease, and returned it. "Thank you, dear," the woman said, studying Serene's face with rheumy eyes. "I'm Irene." "Pleasure to meet you," Serene replied, her tone warming slightly. Dominic passed by with the beverage cart, offering drinks to the rows ahead. When he reached them, he avoided looking directly at Serene. "Something to drink?" he asked, addressing the question to Kieran rather than her. "Coffee, black," Kieran replied. "Water, please," Serene added. Dominic placed a plastic cup of water on her tray without comment, but his movements were careful, almost apologetic. 90 minutes into the flight, the cabin lights flickered. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, please take your seats." Seconds later, the plane hit unexpected turbulence. Overhead, bins rattled violently, and several passengers gasped as the aircraft dropped suddenly before stabilizing. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling in several rows, including theirs. While passengers around her fumbled with their masks, Serene calmly secured her own, then efficiently assisted the now awake but confused Irene. Noticing a young child across the aisle struggling alone, she reached over to help him too, her movements precise and practiced. Like this, she instructed the boy quietly. Small breaths. Dominic, bracing himself in the galley, noticed her composure and methodical actions, a stark contrast to the panic around her. After the turbulence subsided and the captain announced they'd be diverting slightly to avoid a storm system, Kieran turned to her with wide eyes. "You didn't even flinch," he said, voice tinged with both admiration and suspicion. "Been through worse," she replied, checking an advanced tactical timepiece with unusual markings. "Like what?" he pressed. She didn't answer, instead pulling out her journal and making notations that appeared to be in some kind of personal code. Coordinates, timestamps, and abbreviations that made little sense to casual observation. The turbulence continued intermittently, less severe but persistent enough to keep the seatbelt sign illuminated. Passengers grew increasingly anxious with each jolt, conversations becoming stilted as they gripped armrests and exchanged nervous glances. Throughout it all, Serene remained perfectly composed, her breathing steady, her movements economical. She was the eye of the storm, utterly calm while chaos swirled around her. The contrast didn't go unnoticed. Dominic made several trips through the cabin, ostensibly checking on passengers, but his gaze lingered on Serene each time. The air marshal, too, continued his subtle observation, his interest clearly piqued by her unnatural composure. An hour later, Serene excused herself to use the lavatory. Walking through the narrow aisle, she stretched subtly, revealing for a split second a glimpse of a specialized compression garment beneath her shirt, the type used for healing significant wounds. The bathroom was barely large enough to turn around in, but Serene moved with practiced efficiency in the confined space. She splashed water on her face, then paused, examining her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who stared back was neither young nor old, her features unremarkable except for her eyes, intense, focused, and carrying the weight of experiences few could comprehend. She touched the scar at her collarbone briefly before readjusting her collar to conceal it. On her return journey, she noticed a young girl crying quietly in her seat, still shaken from the earlier turbulence. Serene knelt beside her. "Know what helps with turbulence? Count your breaths. 5 in, hold for 5, 5 out." The girl tried it, her shoulders gradually relaxing. "My team uses that technique in difficult situations," Serene added softly. The girl's father, Nathaniel, studied Serene with sudden interest. "Are you a therapist?" "No," Serene replied. "Just experienced with stress management." As she turned to leave, her shirt shifted slightly, revealing the edge of a serious scar on her back, the distinctive pattern of shrapnel damage that any combat veteran would recognize. Nathaniel, a veteran himself based on the memorial bracelet he wore, noticed it immediately. His expression transformed from gratitude to something deeper, recognition and respect. He watched her with new intensity as she returned to her seat. In the galley, Dominic approached Vanetta. "That woman we moved from first class, did you see how she handled herself during the turbulence?" "What about it?" Vanetta asked, distracted by her duties. "It was professional, military-grade calm," Dominic said, lowering his voice. "And did you notice how she helped that kid before any of us could get there?" "So she's good in a crisis. Doesn't mean she belongs in first class," Vanetta replied, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Why was she moved anyway? The manifest showed her assigned to 3A. Vanetta avoided his eyes. "It wasn't my call. The supervisor specifically requested it when he saw the passenger manifest. Said her name was flagged." "Flagged? For what?" "I don't know. Above my pay grade." Vanetta moved away, ending the conversation. Dominic remained in place, troubled. He glanced back towards Serene's seat with newfound curiosity. The sky outside had darkened considerably, storm clouds gathering around their diverted route. The constant turbulence had subsided, but the tension in the cabin remained palpable. Irene had fallen asleep again, her head resting against the window. Kieran had abandoned his laptop in favor of a paperback, though his eyes frequently strayed to Serene with undisguised curiosity. Serene herself seemed lost in thought, her gaze fixed on some middle distance. The journal lay open in her lap, filled with those strange notations, a private language that told a story no one else could read. A call went out over the PA system. "If there are any medical professionals on board, Please ring your call button. Serene didn't ring her button, but stood anyway, moving deliberately toward the commotion at the back of the plane. A middle-aged man was having a seizure in the last row. Flight attendants hovered uncertainly around him, their training insufficient for the situation. Serene stepped forward, her entire demeanor shifting. "I need space, a blanket, and something soft for his head," she instructed, her quiet voice carrying natural authority that made people instinctively comply. She knelt beside the man, efficiently turning him into recovery position while checking his airways. Her hands moved with practiced precision, stabilizing his head to prevent injury. "How long has he been seizing?" she asked a nearby passenger. "About a minute before they called," the woman replied. Serene nodded, continuing her methodical care until the seizure subsided. She stayed with the man as he regained consciousness, asking targeted questions about his medical history and current medication. The entire scene played out with the clockwork precision of a military operation, Serene at the center, calmly directing resources while personally managing the crisis. It was a side of her that contrasted sharply with the quiet, unassuming woman who had been displaced from first-class hours earlier. Vanetta watched the scene unfold, her earlier certainty visibly shaken. "Where did you learn that?" she asked after the situation stabilized. "Combat medical training," Serene answered simply, washing her hands at the galley sink. "You're a military doctor?" Vanetta pressed. "No." Serene dried her hands and returned to her seat without elaboration, leaving Vanetta staring after her with a furrowed brow. The air marshal, who had observed the entire incident, made his way to the forward galley, where he pulled Dominic aside. "That woman in 14B, what's her name?" Dominic hesitated. "Everly, I think. Serene Everly." The air marshal's expression changed subtly. "Interesting. Do you know her?" Dominic asked. "No," the marshal replied too quickly. "Just doing my job." As Dominic returned to his duties, he noticed the air marshal discreetly checking something on his phone, his face growing increasingly serious with each passing moment. Back in her seat, Serene found Kieran watching her with undisguised fascination. "That was impressive," he said. "Where'd you learn first aid like that?" "Military," she replied, offering nothing more. "Which branch?" "Navy." "My cousin's in the Navy," Kieran continued eagerly. "He works on submarines. What do you do?" Serene's eyes met his, her gaze level and unreadable. "I swim." Before Kieran could press further, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into their destination. Flight attendants began moving through the cabin, collecting trash and preparing for landing. Dominic paused at their row. "Thank you for your assistance with the medical situation," he said to Serene, his earlier avoidance replaced by genuine respect. She acknowledged his thanks with a nod. "I wanted to apologize about the seating situation," he added, lowering his voice. "It wasn't right." "You were following orders," Serene replied without rancor. "I understand chain of command." Something in her phrasing made Dominic look at her more closely. "Were you an officer?" Serene's lips curved in the barest hint of a smile. "Still am." This revelation clearly surprised him. He opened his mouth to ask more, then thought better of it and moved on to the next row. The plane began its descent, banking through cloud cover that occasionally illuminated the cabin with flashes of lightning. Most passengers gripped their armrests during these moments of turbulence, but Serene remained perfectly still, her breathing steady and controlled. Irene awakened as the pressure changed in the cabin. She blinked in confusion, then fumbled for something in her purse. "My ears always hurt during landing," she explained, pulling out a small tin of mints. "These help." As she tried to open the tin, her arthritic fingers slipped. The tin fell, scattering mints across the floor. "I'm so sorry," she fussed, trying to reach down. "Stay seated," Serene said gently. "I'll get them." As Serene bent to retrieve the mints, something slipped from her shirt pocket, a small metal object that landed near her foot. The air marshal, passing by to return to his seat for landing, noticed it immediately. His eyes widened in recognition, and he quickly looked away, as though he'd seen something he wasn't meant to. Serene retrieved the object swiftly, tucking it back into her pocket before anyone else could notice. But the air marshal's reaction had been unmistakable. He knew what it was, and it had changed his entire assessment of her. The plane continued its descent, the landing gear deploying with a mechanical thud that reverberated through the cabin. Rain pelted the windows as they broke through the cloud layer, the runway lights glimmering through the downpour. "I hate landing in storms," Kieran muttered, gripping his armrests. "Watch the horizon line," Serene advised. "It helps with spatial orientation." As the plane touched down with a slight bounce, then settled onto the tarmac, a collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. Passengers immediately reached for phones and bags, the familiar cacophony of arrival filling the space. Serene remained seated, waiting patiently as others pushed and jostled their way into the aisle. Irene gathered her belongings slowly, her movements hampered by age and stiffness. "Let me help you with that," Serene offered, retrieving the elderly woman's bag from under the seat. "Thank you, dear. You've been so kind," Irene replied. "Most young people these days wouldn't bother with an old woman like me." "My grandmother raised me," Serene said, a rare personal detail offered freely. "She taught me the value of respect." "She did a fine job?" Irene responded warmly. As they waited for the aisle to clear, Nathaniel, the veteran whose daughter Serene had helped during turbulence, approached from a few rows back. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low enough that only Serene could hear. "I noticed your scar earlier, shrapnel pattern, Helmand Province." Serene's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition of a shared experience. "Good eye." Nathaniel nodded. 82nd Airborne, 2 tours. You? "I swim." Serene repeated the same phrase she'd given Kieran, but this time with the barest emphasis that carried additional meaning. Nathaniel's eyes widened slightly, understanding dawning. He straightened almost imperceptibly, a movement so subtle most would miss it, but unmistakably the ghost of a military stance. "It was an honor sharing this flight with you," he said simply, then moved forward in the aisle. The interaction hadn't gone unnoticed. The air marshal, standing a few rows ahead, had watched the entire exchange with keen interest. As passengers began disembarking, he positioned himself near the exit, his attention fixed on Serene. When she finally reached the front of the plane, Vanetta was there, her earlier coldness replaced by uncertainty. "Thank you for your assistance with the medical situation," she said formally. Serene nodded once in acknowledgement and continued toward the exit. As she passed the first-class section, Wesley and his colleagues avoided her gaze, their earlier mockery forgotten. At the aircraft door, Captain Harlow stood greeting deplaning passengers. He nodded politely to each person, but when Serene approached, the air marshal leaned in and whispered something in his ear. The captain's demeanor changed instantly. He straightened, his casual friendliness replaced by something akin to deference. "Thank you for flying with us today, Commander," he said, his voice carrying a new note of respect. Serene paused, studying his face. She hadn't introduced herself as a commander to anyone on board. "Have we met, Captain?" she asked quietly. "No, ma'am," he replied, "but I've read about Operation Arclight. The air marshal recognized you." A slight tension appeared in Serene's shoulders, the first crack in her composed facade. "That operation remains classified." "Of course," the captain replied quickly. "My apologies. I served 20 years Air Force before commercial aviation. Your reputation precedes you." Serene's expression remained unreadable, but she offered a small nod of acknowledgement before continuing into the jetway. Behind her, Vanetta turned to the captain, confusion evident on her face. "Who is she?" she whispered. The captain watched Serene's retreating figure. Someone who should never have been moved from first class. In the terminal, Serene moved with purposeful efficiency, bypassing the crowds at baggage claim and heading directly for the exit. The air marshal followed at a distance, maintaining visual contact without being obvious about his surveillance. As Serene approached the airport security checkpoint, a man in a dark suit detached himself from the wall where he'd been waiting. Tall and imposing, with the unmistakable bearing of military or intelligence, he stepped directly into her path. "Lieutenant Commander Everly," he said, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. "Welcome back. The briefing has been moved up. There's a car waiting." Serene stopped, her entire demeanor shifting subtly as she assessed the man before her. Whatever she saw satisfied her, because she gave a single nod of acknowledgement. "Lead the way." As they turned toward a side exit, the air marshal finally caught up. He addressed the suited man directly. "Callahan," he said with a nod of recognition, "tell Langford we need to revisit security protocols for transit. The commander was compromised on this flight." "Noted," the suited man replied curtly. The air marshal turned to Serene. Commander, it's been an honor. Your actions in Balochistan saved a lot of lives. You have me confused with someone else, Serene replied evenly, but her eyes carried a warning. Of course, my mistake, the marshal conceded, though his expression suggested otherwise. As Serene walked away with the suited man, the pieces of a larger puzzle began to assemble themselves. Her military bearing, the specialized medical training, the combat scars, the recognition from officials who shouldn't know who she was. Lieutenant Commander Serene Everly was clearly not just any Navy officer. The question remained, who was she really, and what operation had brought her onto this flight under such deep cover that even her name had been flagged in the airline system? The answer would have to wait, as she disappeared through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, leaving behind a wake of confusion and speculation. Have you ever encountered someone who was judged unfairly based on appearances, only to discover hidden depths that changed everything? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most extraordinary people walk among us unrecognized, carrying burdens and responsibilities we can scarcely imagine. 3 days later, Serene found herself seated in the back of a secure government vehicle, Washington's rain-slicked streets sliding past the tinted windows. The debriefings had taken longer than expected, the questions more pointed, the scrutiny more intense. Something's changed, she remarked to Callahan, who sat across from her reviewing documents on a secured tablet. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. The operation was successful, that's what matters. And yet, I've been debriefed by 3 separate panels, including 2 people who shouldn't have known about my involvement at all. She watched his reaction closely. My cover's been compromised. Callahan's lack of response told her everything she needed to know. The flight, she said. It wasn't a question. You're scheduled for extraction and reassignment, he replied, avoiding direct confirmation. Today's meeting is your final debrief, then 3 weeks leave before your next deployment. Serene absorbed this information without visible reaction, though inwardly she felt a familiar tension building. Operational security had been her lifeline for years. If her identity was compromised, it put not only herself, but her entire team at risk. The car pulled up to a nondescript government building, one of dozens in this section of Washington, that housed various intelligence operations. No external signage indicated its purpose, and the security was subtle but comprehensive. Cameras tracked every approach angle, and the innocuous-looking men stationed at the entrance were clearly specialized security personnel. Callahan escorted her through a series of security checkpoints into an underground conference room. The naval officers already seated at the table stood as she entered, all except one. Admiral Thaddeus Langford remained seated at the head of the table, his weathered face unreadable. Lieutenant Commander Everly, he said, gesturing to an empty chair. Let's get this wrapped up, shall we? I'm sure you're eager for that leave time. The debrief proceeded methodically. Mission parameters, execution details, outcomes, complications. Serene reported with precision, her accounts clinical and objective. The other officers occasionally asked clarifying questions, but Langford remained silent, watching her with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something specific. When the formal debrief concluded, the other officers gathered their materials and filed out, leaving only Serene and Langford at the table. The operation was a success, Langford said once they were alone. 12 hostages recovered, minimal casualties, intelligence secured, textbook execution. Thank you, sir. And yet, he continued, leaning forward slightly, 3 days after your return, I receive a call from a commercial airline. Their security team flagged an unusual interaction involving one of their air marshals who claims to have identified a SEAL commander on a domestic flight. Care to explain? Serene met his gaze evenly. The air marshal made assumptions based on limited information. Did he see your Trident? A brief silence. No, sir. Don't lie to me, Everly. It doesn't suit you. Langford's voice remained calm, but carried unmistakable authority. The marshal reported that your Trident was visible to multiple passengers. Additionally, the flight captain, a former Air Force officer, recognized your name in connection with Operation Arclight. Serene's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A mistake on my part. I had the Trident in my personal effects. It should have been secured. A mistake, Langford repeated, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. You've made exactly 3 mistakes in your entire career with naval special warfare. The first was in BUD-SC, when you pushed yourself into hyperthermia during Hell Week. The second was in Yemen, when you disregarded extraction protocols to recover a wounded team member. And now this. He sat back. 3 mistakes in 15 years. That's quite a record. What are the operational implications, sir? Serene asked, redirecting to the practical concerns. Your identity has been compromised, though not catastrophically. Most passengers will have forgotten the incident by now, or written it off as an interesting anecdote. The airline has agreed to maintain confidentiality. The real concern is why it happened at all. Sir, you don't make careless mistakes, Everly. You don't let your guard down. And you certainly don't leave classified identifiers where they can be accidentally revealed. Langford studied her face. Unless part of you wanted to be recognized. The accusation hung in the air between them. With respect, sir, that's not accurate, Serene said finally, her voice level. The mission was physically taxing. I was operating on minimal sleep for 72 hours before extraction. My judgment was impaired. I've read your medical evaluation. Mild concussion, 2 cracked ribs, 27 stitches across 3 separate wounds. And yet, you declined the offered recovery time in Germany. The mission was complete. I wanted to come home. Home, Langford repeated thoughtfully. When was the last time you took leave, Commander? 14 months ago, sir. And before that? 20 months. Langford nodded slowly. The Pentagon is concerned about operational fatigue among special operators, especially those working at your tempo. I'm fit for duty, sir. Your record speaks for itself. 6 successful deep cover operations in the last 3 years alone. More combat deployments than any other active SEAL. The first and only woman to not only complete BUD-S, but advance to team leadership. Langford paused. But even the most exceptional operators have limits. Are you questioning my capabilities, Admiral? I'm questioning whether you've been pushed beyond reasonable human endurance, Langford replied bluntly. The airline incident may seem minor, but it indicates a potential breakdown in your operational discipline. That concerns me. Serene remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. Your leave is extended to 6 weeks, Langford said finally. That's an order, not a suggestion. During that time, I want you to report to Dr. Winters for psychological evaluation. Sir, with respect, this isn't punitive, Everly. It's preventative. We've invested too much in you to lose you to burnout. Langford stood, indicating the meeting was over. 6 weeks, no exceptions. As Serene left the building, the rain had intensified, sheets of water cascading down, obscuring the city around her. She stood under the building's overhang, watching the downpour with unseeing eyes as she processed the implications of Langford's decision. 6 weeks of inactivity. 6 weeks of civilian life. 6 weeks to contemplate the mistake that had jeopardized years of careful anonymity. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Callahan. Apartment secured as requested. Key under the mat. Driver waiting when you're ready. At least she wouldn't have to stay in base housing. The prospect of 6 weeks surrounded by military personnel who might recognize her was unpalatable. Better to disappear into the anonymity of a civilian neighborhood. The black SUV was parked across the street, its engine idling. As Serene approached, the driver, a young woman in a dark suit, stepped out to open the door for her. Where to, Commander? National Airport, Serene replied, sliding into the back seat. And I'm not in uniform. Serene is fine. The driver nodded and pulled away from the curb, merging into the mid-afternoon traffic. Serene leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. The accumulated fatigue of the past weeks pressed down on her, made heavier by the knowledge that her carefully constructed professional identity had developed cracks. Her mind returned to the flight, analyzing her actions with clinical detachment. The Trident had been secured in an inner pocket of her backpack, wrapped in a spare shirt. For it to fall out, she would have had to remove the shirt without checking what was inside it, an amateur mistake she couldn't recall making since her earliest training days. Had Langford been right? Had some subconscious part of her wanted recognition? The thought was troubling. Throughout her career, Serene had embraced the shadows, finding freedom in anonymity. As one of the only women in naval special warfare, she'd learned early that standing out meant additional scrutiny. Better to blend in, to let her actions speak for themselves, to become functionally invisible, except when operational necessity demanded otherwise. The driver navigated through the congested streets with practiced ease. As they passed the Lincoln Memorial, Serene caught sight of a school group gathered on the steps, their young faces upturned toward their tour guide. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, untouched by the realities she faced daily. Sometimes she wondered what that would be like, to move through the world without constantly assessing threats, without the weight of classified knowledge, without the hypervigilance that had become her baseline state of existence. Domestic or international terminal? The driver asked, interrupting her thoughts. Domestic, Serene replied. Seattle flight. The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, momentarily curious. Seattle was about as far from D.C. as one could get within the continental United States. Visiting family? Something like that, Serene answered non-committally. The truth was more complicated. She owned a small cabin on one of Washington's less populated islands, a retreat purchased under a shell company years ago, known only to a handful of trusted individuals. It was the closest thing to home she had, though she'd spent less than 6 months there, total, over the past decade. At the airport, Serene thanked the driver and entered the terminal, immediately scanning the space out of habit. Exit points, security personnel, potential vantage points. The hyper-awareness never truly switched off, regardless of location or circumstance. She approached the check-in counter, presenting her identification and credit card. The airline representative typed briefly, then frowned at her screen. Ms. Everly, I see you're booked in economy, but there appears to be a note in your reservation. She typed again, her expression changing to one of surprise. You've been upgraded to first class, complimentary. Serene raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes, with the airline's apologies for any inconvenience on your previous flight. The representative smiled, though her eyes reflected confusion. Clearly she had no knowledge of what inconvenience was being referenced. Thank you, Serene said simply, accepting the boarding pass. As she moved toward security, she noted the unusual nature of the upgrade. Airlines rarely issued formal apologies, especially not with expensive compensatory actions. Someone with significant influence had intervened. The security line moved slowly, passengers shuffling forward with the resigned patience of experienced travelers. Serene observed them with professional detachment, a businessman speaking too loudly on his phone, a mother trying to corral energetic children, an elderly couple helping each other remove shoes for the scanner. When her turn came, she placed her minimal luggage on the conveyor belt and walked through the scanner without incident. On the other side, she gathered her belongings and proceeded toward the gate. The boarding area was already crowded when she arrived. She found a seat with a clear view of both the gate entrance and the terminal hallway, positioning herself with her back to the wall. Operational habits that never quite faded, even in civilian contexts. As passengers gathered for boarding, Serene noticed a familiar face among them, the air marshal from her previous flight. He was in civilian clothes now, but his bearing and alert gaze were unmistakable. Their eyes met briefly across the waiting area. The marshal gave a small nod of recognition, which Serene acknowledged with the barest inclination of her head. Message received, she was being monitored. Whether this was standard procedure following her identity compromise or something more significant, she couldn't determine. Either way, it reinforced Langford's concerns about her operational security. The boarding process began, and Serene waited until her group was called, before approaching the gate. The attendant scanned her boarding pass with a smile. Enjoy your flight, Ms. Everly. The first-class cabin was half empty, allowing Serene the luxury of both a window seat and an empty adjacent seat. She stowed her bag and settled in, acutely aware of the contrast with her previous flight experience. As other first-class passengers boarded, she noted the air marshal taking a seat toward the rear of the aircraft, close enough to observe, but not so close as to be obvious. Professional courtesy, or perhaps acknowledgement, that she was aware of his presence. The flight attendant approached, offering a pre-departure beverage. Serene requested water, which was delivered promptly in an actual glass rather than the plastic cups of economy. First time to Seattle? The attendant asked conversationally. No, I've been before, Serene replied. Business or pleasure this trip? A little of both. The attendant seemed about to ask another question when a commotion at the front of the cabin drew her attention. A late-arriving passenger was arguing with the gate agent about his seat assignment. I specifically booked first class, the man insisted, his voice carrying throughout the cabin. This is unacceptable. The gate agent maintained a professional demeanor, despite the passengers' increasing agitation. "Sir, your reservation shows economy class. I understand your frustration, but the flight is full and—" "Check again," the man demanded. "The name is Wesley Ashford. I'm a platinum member." Serene's attention sharpened at the familiar name. It couldn't be coincidence that the same executive from her previous flight was now experiencing his own seating difficulties. The gate agent checked her tablet again, then shook her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ashford, but your reservation is definitely for economy. If you'd like to speak with customer service about how this happened, they can assist you after the flight, but right now, we need to complete boarding." Wesley's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. I want to speak to a supervisor." "Sir, we need to close the cabin doors. Your seat is 24C in the main cabin." With visible reluctance, Wesley finally conceded, throwing one last glare at the gate agent before proceeding down the aisle toward economy. As he passed through first class, his eyes fell on Serene, widening with recognition. He stopped abruptly, staring at her in disbelief. "You're in first class? Again?" "Sir, please continue to your seat," the flight attendant intervened. "We need to prepare for departure." Wesley ignored her, his attention fixed on Serene. "Wait, I know you. You're that woman from the flight to Baltimore, the one they moved to economy." Serene returned his gaze evenly, neither confirming nor denying his statement. "Sir, your seat is in the main cabin," the flight attendant repeated more firmly. "This is outrageous," Wesley sputtered. "She gets upgraded while I get downgraded. Do you know who I am?" "Someone who's delaying our departure," came a voice from behind him. It was the air marshal, now standing in the aisle. Though in civilian clothes, his bearing carried unmistakable authority. "Move to your assigned seat, sir." Something in the marshal's tone finally penetrated Wesley's indignation. With a last frustrated glance at Serene, he continued down the aisle toward economy. The flight attendant turned to Serene with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry about that, Ms. Everly." "No problem," Serene replied, the phrase echoing her response during the previous flight's displacement. As the cabin doors closed and the aircraft began pushing back from the gate, Serene reflected on the strange symmetry of the situation. The same executive who had smirked at her removal from first class was now experiencing similar treatment, while she sat comfortably in the upgraded cabin. She didn't believe in karma, but the reversal carried a certain poetic justice. The flight proceeded smoothly, the 6-hour journey passing in relative comfort. Serene alternated between reading a tactical analysis journal on her tablet and gazing out the window at the landscape below. She declined the offered meal service, instead sipping occasionally from a bottle of water as the miles slipped away beneath them. Halfway through the flight, the air marshal made his way to the forward lavatory, pausing briefly beside her seat on his return journey. "Commander," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "My apologies for the other day. I should have been more discreet." "No harm done," she replied equally quietly. He hesitated, then added, "That recovery operation in the Gulf last month. 23 hostages, 0 casualties. That was your team, wasn't it?" Serene's expression remained neutral. "I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else." A knowing smile touched the marshal's lips. "Of course, my mistake." He continued back to his seat, leaving Serene to contemplate this additional evidence of her compromised identity. If a federal air marshal had access to operational details of her team's activities, the security breach extended beyond a simple recognition incident. Someone with significant clearance was talking about her, which violated multiple protocols and potentially endangered both her and her team members. The realization settled like ice in her stomach. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the safety of the people who trusted her leadership, the men and women who followed her into the world's most dangerous environments because they believed in her judgment. As the flight began its descent into Seattle, Serene made a decision. 6 weeks of leave or not, she needed to identify the source of the security breach and neutralize it before her team's next deployment. The rain that greeted their arrival matched the weather she'd left in D.C., a continuous drizzle that softened the edges of the city and muted the already subdued colors of the Pacific Northwest. Serene moved through the terminal with purpose, bypassing baggage claim since she traveled only with her carry-on. Outside, she bypassed the line of waiting taxis and ride shares, instead walking directly to a modest gray sedan parked in the short-term lot. The vehicle was registered to one of her cover identities and had been left there by a support team member the previous day. As she approached the car, she noticed a small folded paper tucked under the windshield wiper. She retrieved it, scanning the surrounding area for observers before unfolding it. Inside was a handwritten note. Surveillance confirmed on your primary residence. Use alternate route. Contact restricted until further notice. The note wasn't signed, but she recognized the handwriting as belonging to Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes, her second in command and one of the few people she trusted implicitly. If Hayes was warning her about surveillance, the situation was more serious than she'd initially assessed. Serene memorized the message, then tore the paper into tiny pieces, which she distributed across several garbage bins. As she made her way back to the terminal, there, she purchased a disposable phone from a convenience store, paid cash, and activated it with minimal personal information. Back at the car, she programmed a single number into the phone, a secure line that connected to Hayes through multiple proxies designed to obscure the origin and destination of any communication. The call connected after 4 rings. "Bookstore," answered a female voice that Serene didn't recognize. "I'm looking for a first edition of The Old Man and the Sea," Serene replied, using the current authentication phrase. A brief pause, then, "We have 1 copy available. Please hold." Seconds later, Hayes' voice came on the line. "Secure channel established. 30-second window." "Received your message," Serene said without preamble. "Assessment? Professional operation, federal resources, not hostiles, internal monitoring." "Langford? Negative, higher, Pentagon level at minimum." "Reason? Unknown, possibly related to Arclight outcomes or the incident on your return flight. Need more time to source." "Timeline? 48 hours for preliminary. Maintain cover until then. Island location compromised." The implications were clear. Someone at the highest levels of military or intelligence command had placed her under surveillance. This went beyond standard protocol following a compromised identity. This was targeted monitoring by her own government. "Understood," Serene replied. "Alternative location? Rainier Safe House, key under the usual spot, clean as of yesterday." "Copy, same channel tomorrow, Euro 900. "Confirmed. Watch your 6, Commander." The line went dead. Serene removed the battery from the phone and placed both parts in her pocket to dispose of later. She sat motionless for several moments, processing the new information and adjusting her plans accordingly. The island cabin was compromised, which meant she needed to change destinations. The Rainier Safe House was a small, nondescript property owned by a shell, company 3 layers removed from any connection to naval special warfare. It was maintained as an emergency extraction point for operations in the Pacific Northwest, stocked with basic supplies and secure communications equipment. Serene started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, merging onto the highway heading south rather than the ferry routes heading west toward the islands. As she drove, she maintained consistent awareness of the traffic around her, watching for signs of surveillance. 2 hours later, having taken a deliberately circuitous route that included several counter-surveillance maneuvers, Serene turned onto a narrow forest road that wound into the foothills of Mount Rainier. The pavement eventually gave way to gravel, then to packed earth as the road climbed higher into the dense pine forest. The safe house was barely visible from the approach, a small, weathered cabin set back from the road, partially obscured by evergreens. No vehicles were parked outside, and no lights shone from the windows. Serene parked a quarter-mile away in a natural clearing, covering the car with a camouflage tarp designed to blend with the surrounding vegetation. She approached the cabin on foot, moving silently through the underbrush with the practiced stealth of someone trained in covert infiltration. The key was exactly where Hayes had indicated, beneath a false rock and a planter of native ferns. Serene unlocked the door and entered cautiously, her senses alert for any sign of disturbance or unexpected presence. The interior was Spartan but functional. A small kitchen area, a living space with basic furniture, a bedroom with a single bed, and a bathroom with a shower. A wood stove occupied one corner, and a stack of split logs stood ready beside it. Serene conducted a thorough sweep of the premises, checking for surveillance devices or signs of intrusion. Finding none, she secured the door and windows before finally allowing herself to relax marginally. She unpacked her few belongings, then retrieved the satellite phone she'd brought. different from the one she'd used on the flight, this one connecting to secure military channels through encrypted protocols. Before making any calls, however, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. If she was under surveillance by her own government, there had to be a reason beyond a simple breach of cover identity. Her record was impeccable, her loyalty unquestioned, her operational effectiveness consistently rated among the highest in naval special warfare. What had changed? The answer, she suspected, lay in Operation Arclight, the mission Langford had referenced and the air marshal had alluded to. Something about that operation had triggered high-level interest in her activities, both professional and personal. Serene moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening forest. Rain continued to fall, droplets catching the last light of day as they pattered against the glass. In the distance, the massive silhouette of Mount Rainier was barely visible through the cloud cover, its snow-capped peak a ghostly presence in the gathering dusk. She was accustomed to isolation, had trained for it, embraced it as necessary for her role. But this was different. For the first time in her career, she felt not just isolated, but potentially compromised by the very institution she had dedicated her life to serving. As night fell completely, Serene made a simple meal from the supplies stocked in the cabin's pantry, eating mechanically while she reviewed the events that had led to this point. The flight incident had been the catalyst, but not the cause. Something deeper was at work, some piece of information or operational detail that had flagged her for special attention. After eating, she powered up the secure laptop stored in the cabin's hidden safe. The system required 3 separate authentication methods before granting access to its encrypted contents. Once logged in, she began methodically reviewing the mission files for Operation Arclight, searching for anything that might explain her current situation. The operation had been straightforward by special operations standards: extraction of 3 high-value intelligence assets from a hostile region, with secondary objectives to recover sensitive materials and eliminate a specific security threat. Her team had executed flawlessly despite unexpected resistance and complications in the extraction zone. All objectives had been achieved with minimal casualties and no team losses. By any standard metric, it had been a success. So, why the surveillance? Why the apparent breach in operational security that allowed an air marshal to recognize her connection to classified activities? The answer wasn't in the official mission parameters. Serene expanded her search, accessing deeper levels of classified information through backdoor protocols normally reserved for emergency situations. If she was discovered, she'd face severe consequences for unauthorized access. But the risk was necessary given the potential threat to her team. Hours passed as she worked, the rain intensifying outside until it drummed steadily against the cabin roof. The sound formed a rhythmic backdrop to her investigation, almost hypnotic in its constancy. Just after midnight, she found it, buried in a subdirective attached to the mission briefing, classified at a level above her normal access, a secondary objective that hadn't been included in her orders. Secure all documentation relating to Operation Kingfisher, Priority Alpha. Kingfisher, the codename sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cabin's dropping temperature. 3 years earlier, she had been involved in a classified operation to extract a deep-cover CIA asset from Sevastopol. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong, ambushed on arrival, communications jammed, extraction point compromised. It had all the hallmarks of an inside betrayal. Her team had suffered heavy casualties, 3 dead, 2 severely wounded. The asset had been killed before they could reach him. The only saving grace had been their recovery of his intelligence cache, a collection of files detailing Russian operations against NATO interests. The mission had been classified at the highest levels and officially disavowed. The dead were honored in private ceremonies, their sacrifice acknowledged only in redacted reports and anonymous stars on memorial walls. Kingfisher had been buried, or so she'd believed. Yet here it was, resurfacing in connection with her most recent operation, without her knowledge or involvement. The implications were disturbing. If Arclight had included objectives related to Kingfisher, then someone had deliberately kept that information from her, despite her role as mission commander. Someone had inserted secondary parameters into her operation without her knowledge. A serious breach of protocol and a potential explanation for the current surveillance. Serene closed the laptop, leaning back in her chair as she processed this new information. The pieces were starting to align, forming a picture she didn't like. Someone at the highest levels was investigating Kingfisher again, using her recent operation as cover. Someone powerful enough to access and modify classified mission parameters. Someone with enough authority to place her under surveillance without explanation or justification. The question remained, why? What aspect of that failed mission from 3 years ago warranted renewed scrutiny now? As she pondered this, a subtle sound from outside caught her attention. A faint crunch of gravel that didn't match the pattern of rainfall. Someone was approaching the cabin. Serene moved silently to the window, keeping to the shadows as she peered into the darkness. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out a figure moving steadily toward the cabin, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with military precision despite the difficult conditions. She reached for her sidearm, then paused as the figure came fully into view beneath the cabin's single exterior light. It was Hayes, soaked to the skin, but instantly recognizable, and his expression, visible even through the rain and darkness, carried an urgency that sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Something was very wrong. Hayes wouldn't risk coming in person unless the situation had escalated dramatically. Serene moved to the door, unlocking it just as Hayes reached the porch. He entered quickly, water streaming from his rain gear onto the wooden floor. "We have a problem," he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled tension. "Kingfisher is active again, and they think you're compromised. Have you ever discovered that someone was watching you secretly, monitoring your movements for reasons unknown? How did you handle the feeling of being observed? Share in the comments below if you've experienced that unsettling sensation of eyes following your every move." Serene stared at Hayes, absorbing his words with the practiced calm that had kept her alive through countless operations. "Explain." Hayes shrugged off his dripping raincoat, hanging it by the door before moving to the cabin's small kitchen table. 2 hours ago, I was contacted by Admiral Langford directly. Someone at the Pentagon has initiated a full security review of all personnel involved in Operation Kingfisher. "Why now?" Serene asked, already calculating implications and contingencies. "Kingfisher was buried 3 years ago. Something surfaced during your arclight extraction. Intelligence recovered from the target location included references to Kingfisher that suggest the original mission wasn't compromised randomly." Hayes paused, meeting her eyes directly. "They believe it was deliberately sabotaged by someone on the inside." The revelation hung between them, heavy with implication. "And they suspect me," Serene stated flatly. "Not Langford," Hayes clarified. "He's fighting for you. But yes, someone higher up has questions about your role. The timing of the airline incident didn't help matters." "The timing," Serene repeated, understanding dawning. "They think I deliberately revealed myself because I'm trying to exit under civilian cover." Hayes nodded grimly. "Which is why I'm here rather than calling. All your communications are being monitored, including the back channels we normally use. Langford warned me off the record." Serene processed this information with clinical detachment, separating personal reaction from operational necessity. "Who else knows about this?" "The surveillance team, obviously, Langford, whoever authorized the review at the Pentagon level, and Callahan, who's been tasked with your direct monitoring." "Callahan," Serene echoed, a new piece clicking into place. "That explains his behavior during the debriefing. He wasn't just providing security transport. He's been assigned to your case specifically," Hayes confirmed. "Langford thinks it's because of his connection to the original Kingfisher operation. He was station chief in Ankara when the intelligence first came through." Serene moved to the window, gazing out at the rain-drenched forest, while her mind worked through scenarios with precision born of years of tactical planning. What triggered this? The original operation was classified beyond standard protocols. Even mentioning Kingfisher should have raised flags. "That's what concerns Langford," Hayes replied, his voice dropping slightly despite the security of their location. "Someone with extremely high clearance accessed the Kingfisher files 2 weeks ago, just as your Arclight mission was being planned. The access was logged but not flagged because it came through official channels with proper authentication. So either someone with appropriate clearance has legitimate concerns," Serene reasoned, "or someone has compromised high-level access credentials." "Exactly. Either way, you're now at the center of renewed scrutiny regarding a failed operation that cost 3 team members their lives. And given the timing of your identification on that commercial flight, it looks suspicious," Serene concluded. "As though I might be preparing to run." Hayes nodded, his expression grave. Langford wanted you to have context for what's happening. He's working to identify the source of the security review. But until then, you need to proceed with extreme caution. Any unusual behavior will only reinforce suspicion. Serene turned from the window, decision made. Then we proceed normally. I continue my leave as scheduled. No evasion, no counter-surveillance measures. Even knowing you're being watched? Especially knowing I'm being watched, Serene replied. If they're looking for signs of guilty behavior, we give them nothing but perfect compliance. Hayes studied her face, seeking reassurance in her composure. And if they're building a case against you regardless of your actions, then we'll need to identify who's really behind this and why they're targeting me specifically. Serene moved to the cabin's small kitchen, putting water on to boil with the practiced efficiency that characterized all her movements. In the meantime, I need everything you can find on what was recovered during Arclight that connected back to Kingfisher. I'll do what I can, but my access is limited, Hayes warned. Whatever was recovered is being handled at levels above my clearance. Use back channels through Schmidt in Naval Intelligence, Serene suggested. She was tangentially involved in the original Kingfisher operation. She might have insights we're missing. Hayes accepted the mug of tea she offered him, his expression troubled. There's something else you should know. Your return flight has been flagged for a follow-up security review. The one where I was upgraded to first class while Wesley Ashford was downgraded to economy, Serene noted with a hint of irony. That wasn't coincidence, Hayes confirmed. After your identity was compromised on the first flight, Langford had Ashford's reservation modified as a small measure of justice. But the airline's internal security flagged the change, especially when Ashford made a scene on board. So not only did my Trident become visible to multiple passengers on the first flight, Serene summarized, but then a high-ranking naval officer intervened to upgrade me and downgrade another passenger on my second flight, creating additional attention and documentation. It doesn't look good, Hayes agreed, particularly to anyone already suspicious of your actions. Serene absorbed this information with the same calm deliberation she brought to all challenges. Then we use it. If I'm already visible, we make my activities so transparent and mundane that whoever is watching loses interest. And if they don't, then we draw them out, Serene replied simply. Sometimes the only way to identify a hidden adversary is to make yourself the target. Hayes's expression reflected both concern and admiration. Risky strategy. Calculated risk, Serene corrected. Now tell me about the surveillance, numbers, positions, rotation schedule. Hayes detailed what he'd observed, a 4-person team operating in shifts, with electronic monitoring supplementing physical observation. Standard procedure for high-value targets, but implemented with resources that suggested serious backing. They're watching the island property and monitoring all known transportation hubs, he concluded. They'll realize you've deviated from expected patterns by morning. Then I'll return to expected patterns, Serene decided. I'll head to the island tomorrow, as originally planned. Act as though this detour never happened. They'll know I came here, Hayes pointed out. My absence has already been noted. You were concerned about a teammate after a difficult operation, Serene replied. Nothing unusual about checking in personally when official channels seemed insufficient. Hayes nodded slowly, seeing the strategy take shape. And when they inevitably question me, you tell them exactly what happened. I shared concerns about being overly fatigued after Arclight. You suggested I take the mandated leave seriously. We discussed nothing operational beyond general team welfare checks. Half-truths, Hayes noted with approval, always more convincing than outright lies. We stick as close to the truth as possible, Serene agreed, just omitting the Kingfisher connection. They spent the next hour developing their approach, anticipating questions and establishing consistent narrative points. When they finished, Hayes gathered his still damp raincoat. I should head back before my absence becomes more suspicious, he said. I'll contact Schmidt tomorrow about the Arclight intelligence. Usual dead drop if I find anything significant. Serene walked him to the door. Watch your back. If they're suspicious of me, they'll be watching my team as well. Always do, Hayes replied with the faint smile that had become his trademark in the tense situations. Try to enjoy your forced vacation, Commander. After he departed, Serene secured the cabin and prepared for a few hours of rest before implementing their plan. As she lay in the narrow bed, listening to rain drumming against the roof, She reflected on the strange sequence of events that had led to this moment. One mistake, a Trident visible to civilian passengers on a commercial flight. Such a small thing to cascade into full-scale surveillance and suspicion. But then, her entire career had been built on understanding how seemingly insignificant details could determine operational outcomes. Sleep came with the practiced ease of someone trained to rest whenever circumstances allowed, her mind shutting down conscious processes, while maintaining a level of awareness that would activate at the first sign of threat. Morning arrived with lingering rain and mist that shrouded the surrounding forest in ethereal gray. Serene prepared efficiently, erasing all evidence of her presence from the cabin before departing. The drive to the ferry terminal was deliberately unhurried, her behavior that of someone on legitimate leave with no concerns about observation. At the terminal, she purchased her ticket without subterfuge, using her real identification and paying with a traceable credit card. As she waited in the vehicle line for boarding, she noted a nondescript sedan 2 cars behind, undoubtedly her surveillance detail. The crossing to the island took just under an hour, the ferry cutting through choppy waters beneath overcast skies. Serene remained in her vehicle, appearing to read a novel while maintaining peripheral awareness of her surroundings. When the ferry docked, she drove directly to her cabin, a modest structure overlooking a small, private cove on the island's less populated eastern shore. The property was isolated but not conspicuously so, nestled among similar vacation homes that remained largely unoccupied during off-season months. Her surveillance detail maintained distance, settling into position at what they likely believed was a discreet vantage point along the main road. Professionals, but not specialized in deep cover operations. Their presence was detectable to someone with Serene's training. She entered the cabin and began the normal routines of someone settling in for an extended stay, unpacking limited belongings, checking basic utilities, assessing supplies. Through the front windows, she could see the slate-gray waters of the Sound, whitecaps forming as wind swept across its surface. Over the next 3 days, Serene established a pattern of ordinary activities, morning runs along the shoreline, trips to the island's small grocery store, evenings spent reading on the porch when weather permitted. To any observer, she appeared to be exactly what her cover suggested, a naval officer taking mandated leave after a demanding deployment. On the 4th day, her satellite phone activated with an encrypted message from Hayes. Information located, regular delivery scheduled. The innocuous phrasing confirmed that Hayes had found something significant through Schmidt and would be using their established dead drop system. In this case, a particular shelf in the island's small public library where materials could be exchanged without direct contact. That afternoon, Serene drove to the library, browsing with apparent casualness while noting the surveillance team member who had followed her inside. She selected several books, including one from the specific shelf that served as their dead drop location. Inside, she found a small data card hidden within the book's dust jacket. Back at the cabin, she accessed the card's contents using specialized encryption software on her secure laptop. The information was fragmented but illuminating. Intelligence fragments recovered during Operation Arclight that referenced Kingfisher by an obscure code designation, used only within the highest echelons of naval intelligence. Most significantly, the recovered intelligence included partial communications, suggesting that the Kingfisher compromise had been deliberate, orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of the operation's parameters and timing. Serene studied the fragments with growing concern. If accurate, they confirmed that someone within Naval Special Operations or intelligence had deliberately sabotaged the Kingfisher extraction, resulting in the deaths of 3 team members and the target asset. The question remained, who would have both the access and motivation to betray an American covert operation? And why was attention now focused on her as a potential suspect? The answer emerged gradually as she analyzed the intelligence fragments in conjunction with her own recollections of the original operation. Kingfisher had been unusual from the start. Hastily planned, compartmentalized beyond normal protocols, with information restricted even within the team. At the time, she had attributed these irregularities to the sensitivity of the asset and his intelligence. Now, with 3 years of additional experience and perspective, she recognized the hallmarks of an operation designed to fail while protecting the true source of compromise. Someone had wanted Kingfisher to fail, but in a way that appeared to be unfortunate circumstance rather than deliberate sabotage. The same someone who now, 3 years later, was concerned about intelligence recovered during Arclight that might expose their original betrayal. The most disturbing implication was clear. Whoever had compromised Kingfisher remained in a position of significant authority within Naval Intelligence or Special Operations Command. Serene encrypted her analysis and prepared a secure message for Hayes, outlining her conclusions and requesting additional information on who had authorized the original Kingfisher operation. As she worked, rain began to fall again, pattering against the windows in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to her forced isolation. The following morning brought unexpected development. As Serene returned from her regular run along the shoreline, she noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked beside her cabin. A black SUV with government plates. Beside it stood Callahan, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying himself with unmistakable official purpose. "Lieutenant Commander," he greeted her as she approached. "I apologize for the unannounced visit." "Mr. Callahan," Serene acknowledged, maintaining the professional courtesy that had characterized their previous interactions. "This is a surprise. A necessary one, unfortunately," he replied. "May we speak inside?" Once in the cabin, Callahan declined her offer of coffee, getting directly to the point with an efficiency she would have appreciated under different circumstances. "Admiral Langford sent me," he said. "There have been developments regarding your situation." "My situation," Serene repeated neutrally. "The security review concerning Operation Kingfisher," Callahan clarified, watching her reaction closely. "Admiral Langford believed you should be informed directly rather than through official channels." Serene maintained her composure, revealing nothing of her own investigations. "What developments?" "The review has been escalated. Your service records have been accessed by the Office of Naval Intelligence Counterintelligence Division. Additionally, all personnel involved in both Kingfisher and Arclight are now under similar scrutiny." "Including you," Serene noted, recalling Hayes' information about Callahan's connection to the original operation. "Including me," he confirmed, "which is partly why I'm here. Admiral Langford believes this has gone beyond normal security protocols. Someone is building a case, not conducting a routine review." "A case against whom?" "That remains unclear," Callahan replied. "But the focus on your activities following your return from Arclight suggests you're a primary person of interest." Serene considered her options carefully before responding. Callahan's presence represented either an opportunity or a threat, depending on his true allegiance. If Langford had genuinely sent him, he could be a valuable ally. If not, revealing her suspicions could accelerate whatever plan was being implemented against her. "Why would Langford send you specifically?" she asked, testing his response. "Because I was peripheral to Kingfisher, but central to Arclight's authorization," Callahan answered readily. "I have visibility into both operations without being directly implicated in either. And because my security clearance allows me to discuss aspects of both that would be restricted for others." His explanation was logical and consistent with what she knew of Langford's methodical approach to sensitive situations. "What does the Admiral suggest?" Serene asked, still withholding her own conclusions. "Transparency with controlled information," Callahan replied. "He believes someone is attempting to construct a narrative of your involvement in Kingfisher's compromise. The most effective counter is to establish your whereabouts and actions during critical time frames with irrefutable evidence. Evidence that would be in classified mission logs," Serene noted. "Not exactly accessible from an island cabin during mandated leave." "Which is why I'm here," Callahan said, producing a secured tablet from his briefcase. "Admiral Langford has authorized temporary access to relevant mission documentation under his authentication codes. We can review and annotate directly, creating a verifiable timeline of your activities before, during, and after Kingfisher." The offer seemed genuine, though Serene maintained healthy skepticism. "That's extraordinarily irregular procedure, Mr. Callahan. As is a counterintelligence investigation of a decorated SEAL commander based on circumstantial connections to a 3-year-old operation," he countered. "Admiral Langford believes irregular circumstances warrant irregular responses." Serene made her decision. "Show me what you have." They spent the next several hours reviewing mission logs, communication records, and after-action reports related to Kingfisher. with Callahan periodically connecting to secure servers to retrieve additional documentation. The process revealed several discrepancies Serene hadn't previously identified. Mission parameters that had changed just before execution. Communication protocols altered without standard notification. Extraction timing shifted by unexplained command decision. Most significantly, they discovered that her team's communication failure during the operation hadn't been the result of enemy jamming as officially reported. The logs showed their secure channel had been administratively deactivated 4 minutes before the ambush, a change that could only have been authorized at the highest levels. This wasn't operational failure, Serene concluded, the evidence now irrefutable. This was deliberate sabotage from within command structure. The question remains, who had both the authority and motivation, Callahan said, his expression grim. And why focus suspicion on me now, Serene added. Unless, the realization struck them simultaneously. Unless the person responsible is directly involved in the current investigation, Callahan finished, creating a scapegoat to divert attention from themselves. We need to identify who authorized the communication shutdown, Serene said, her training kicking in as she shifted to operational planning. That's our direct link to whoever compromised Kingfisher. Callahan nodded, already accessing deeper levels of the secure system. Admiral Langford anticipated this direction. He's provided access to the authorization logs, though they're heavily compartmentalized. What they found confirmed Serene's worst suspicions. The communication shutdown had been authorized by Vice Admiral Harrison Ward, then Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence and currently serving as Director. Ward, Callahan breathed, the implications clear. He would have had oversight of both Kingfisher and the current security review. And the authority to flag my name in airline security systems, Serene added, creating the appearance of suspicious behavior when I was identified on that flight. A perfect circular trap, Callahan agreed. He compromises Kingfisher, buries the evidence for 3 years, then when Arclight threatens to expose him, he initiates an investigation focusing on you as the potential leak. We need to get this information to Langford immediately, Serene decided, before Ward realizes what we've discovered. Callahan was already securing the tablet, erasing local traces of their access. I'll take a different ferry back to the mainland, less chance of surveillance noting our connection. I'll contact Hayes through secure channels, Serene added. He needs to be warned. As Callahan prepared to leave, a notification pinged on his secure phone. He checked it, his expression immediately shifting to concern. What is it? Serene asked, instantly alert. Change of plans, Callahan replied, showing her the screen. Admiral Langford has been called to testify before a closed Senate Intelligence Committee hearing tomorrow morning regarding operational security concerns within naval special warfare. Ward's accelerating his timeline, Serene realized. He knows Langford is investigating the Kingfisher connection, which means we have less than 24 hours before this becomes a public spectacle that buries the truth under layers of classification and national security exemptions, Callahan concluded. Then we move now, Serene decided, already gathering essential items. We need to reach Langford before that hearing begins. We'll never make it to D.C. in time, Callahan pointed out, and attempting to do so would trigger immediate response from surveillance teams. We're not going to D.C., Serene replied. Langford always stops at Andrews Air Force Base when traveling to congressional hearings, military protocol and personal superstition. We intercept him there, present our evidence directly. And your surveillance detail? Callahan asked. Serene's expression hardened with determination. Let them follow. By the time they realize what we're doing, it will be too late to stop us. The journey to Washington, D.C. became a carefully orchestrated exercise in misdirection. Rather than attempting to lose her surveillance, Serene maintained completely transparent movements. Commercial flights with her own identification, standard transportation options, no counter-surveillance measures. To anyone monitoring her activities, she appeared to be responding to an urgent family situation. A story supported by carefully placed phone calls discussing a fabricated medical emergency involving her grandmother in Virginia. Callahan traveled separately, maintaining the appearance of completing his official check-in before returning to regular duties. They coordinated through encrypted messages routed through Hayes, who had positioned himself at Andrews to confirm Langford's arrival schedule. By early morning, Serene had reached the small Virginia town near Andrews, where her supposedly ill grandmother resided. Her surveillance detail maintained their distance, likely reporting her movements as consistent with her cover story. At E0745, Hayes confirmed Langford's transport had departed the Pentagon, scheduled to arrive at Andrews by 0830, before continuing to Capitol Hill for his 1000 testimony. At E0810, Serene received Callahan's confirmation that he had cleared base security and was positioned near the officer's arrival area. At 8225, Serene herself approached the base checkpoint, presenting her military identification and citing a prearranged meeting with Admiral Langford. Her surveillance detail, now visibly concerned by this unexpected development, was delayed at the checkpoint due to lack of proper military clearance. The timing was precise, the execution flawless. As Langford's vehicle pulled into the designated area, Serene and Callahan approached from different directions, intercepting the Admiral as he exited his car. "Commander Everly," Langford acknowledged with visible surprise, "this is highly irregular." "So is the sabotage of Operation Kingfisher and the subsequent attempt to frame me for it," Serene replied without preamble, nodding to Callahan, who produced the secured tablet. "We have evidence you need to see before your testimony, sir." Langford's expression shifted from surprise to focused intensity. "My office now?" Inside the small office reserved for his use while at Andrews, Serene and Callahan presented their findings: the administrative deactivation of communications, the authorization by Vice Admiral Ward, the pattern of manipulation extending from Kingfisher through to the current investigation. Langford absorbed the information with the calculating precision that had earned him his reputation as one of naval intelligence's sharpest minds. "This evidence is compelling but circumstantial," he concluded after reviewing everything. Ward could claim operational necessity for the communication shutdown. Without direct confirmation of hostile intent, it's his word against circumstantial evidence. "There is one more piece," Callahan said, accessing a final secured file. "Schmidt from Naval Intelligence found this in the Arclight Intelligence, a financial trace linking payments from a known foreign intelligence front to an account associated with Ward's brother-in-law. The amounts correlate exactly with the timing of 3 compromised operations, including Kingfisher." Langford reviewed the financial data, his expression hardening. "This changes the equation. Financial evidence is harder to explain away than operational decisions." "What happens now, sir?" Serene asked. "I take this information to the Intelligence Committee in closed session," Langford replied decisively. "The financial evidence alone warrants immediate counterintelligence investigation at the highest levels." "And my situation," Serene pressed, "remains complicated," Langford acknowledged. "The airline incident still created a security concern that will require formal resolution. But, with Ward's motives now in question, the focus of inquiry will shift significantly." As they prepared to depart, Langford turned to Serene with unexpected gravity. "Commander, I owe you an apology. I should have recognized the pattern earlier." "You sent Callahan," Serene replied simply. "That was enough." Outside the office, base security intercepted them. Serene's surveillance detail had apparently escalated their concerns up the chain of command. 2 military police officers approached with clear purpose. "Lieutenant Commander Serene Everly?" one asked formally. "Yes," she acknowledged. "Please come with us, ma'am. By order of Vice Admiral Ward, you're being detained pending investigation of security violations." Before Serene could respond, Langford stepped forward, his authority radiating from every aspect of his bearing. "This officer is currently under my direct command for a matter of national security. Your detention order is countermanded." The MPs hesitated, caught between conflicting directives from superior officers. "Additionally," Langford continued, "I am initiating Article 32 proceedings against Vice Admiral Ward, based on evidence of treasonable actions against United States military personnel. As of this moment, any orders originating from Admiral Ward regarding Lieutenant Commander Everly are suspended pending investigation." The formal invocation of Article 32, the military's preliminary hearing procedure for serious charges, shifted the dynamics immediately. The MPs straightened, responding to the clear chain of command. "Yes, Admiral," the senior MP acknowledged. "We'll need official documentation of the Article 32 initiation." "My aide is preparing it now," Langford replied, gesturing to an officer who had emerged from an adjacent office. "In the meantime, I require Lieutenant Commander Everly's presence at my congressional testimony. You're welcome to accompany us if your orders require maintaining visual contact." The calculated precision of Langford's response left no room for further objection. Within minutes, they were en route to Capitol Hill, the surveillance detail now transformed into an official escort. The closed hearing of the Senate Intelligence Committee began precisely at 1,000 hours. Serene, positioned behind Langford as his technical advisor, watched as the Admiral methodically dismantled the case that had been building against her while simultaneously presenting the evidence against Vice Admiral Ward. The financial records proved particularly damaging, prompting immediate calls for expanded investigation and the temporary suspension of Ward from his duties pending further inquiry. By early afternoon, the situation had transformed completely. Ward was being escorted to a secure facility for intensive questioning, his communications and access privileges suspended. The investigation that had been targeting Serene was now redirected toward identifying all operations potentially compromised by Ward's actions. As they exited the committee room, Langford turned to Serene. "Your surveillance detail has been officially reassigned. You're clear to return to regular duty status, though I'd suggest completing your leave as originally scheduled. You've earned the rest." "Thank you, sir," Serene replied. "What happens with the airline incident report? It's still in my file." Langford's expression softened slightly. "Already addressed. The official determination is inadvertent exposure during post-operation fatigue state. No disciplinary action warranted." As Callahan escorted her from the building, Serene reflected on the extraordinary reversal of her situation. What had begun as a simple flight home had cascaded through public humiliation, security investigation, and ultimately to the exposure of a high-level betrayal that had cost the lives of her teammates years earlier. "What now, Commander?" Callahan asked as they reached the building's exit. "Now I complete my leave as ordered," Serene replied with unexpected lightness, starting with a proper first-class flight back to Seattle. 2 days later, Serene found herself again boarding a commercial aircraft, this time with no uncertainty about her seating assignment or concern about surveillance. As she settled into her first-class seat, she noted with ironic amusement that the flight attendant was none other than Dominic from her original contentious flight. Recognition flickered in his eyes as he offered her a pre-departure beverage. "Commander Everly, welcome aboard. It's good to see you again." "Thank you," she replied simply. "I wanted to apologize again for what happened on your previous flight with us," he continued, his sincerity evident. "It was completely inappropriate." "Water under the bridge," Serene assured him. As other passengers boarded, Dominic leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I heard what happened afterward. My brother serves in the Navy. Word travels." Serene raised an eyebrow, surprised by this breach of operational security. "Not the classified parts," Dominic clarified quickly. "Just that the person responsible for moving you to economy that day turned out to be under investigation themselves. Poetic justice, I suppose." "Something like that," Serene agreed with a small smile. The remaining passengers filed aboard, the first-class cabin gradually filling. Just before the doors closed, a final passenger hurried aboard, a flustered businessman apologizing profusely for his late arrival. It was Wesley Ashford. His eyes met Serene's as he made his way to his assigned seat, directly across the aisle from her. Recognition dawned immediately, followed by visible discomfort. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with evident effort, Wesley broke the silence. "Commander," he acknowledged, surprising her with the correct address. "I believe I owe you an apology for my behavior on our previous flight." "Mr. Ashford," she replied evenly, "no apology necessary." "I disagree," he persisted. "I made assumptions based on appearance. I was wrong and behaved poorly." The simple admission, offered without qualification, surprised her. Apology accepted. As the flight attendants prepared for departure, Wesley seemed to struggle with something further. Finally, he spoke again. "My son enlisted in the Marines last year," he said. "When I told him about our encounter, before I knew who you were, he was deeply disappointed in me. After the story broke about Vice Admiral Ward, he connected the dots and realized you were the unnamed officer in the reports." Serene remained silent, letting him continue. "He reminded me that we never know who might be sitting next to us, what burdens they carry, what service they provide that we never see. Wesley's expression reflected genuine regret. It was a valuable lesson in humility. "Your son sounds like a thoughtful young man," Serene offered. "Smarter than his father, certainly," Wesley agreed with a self-deprecating smile. "He asked me to thank you for your service, if I ever had the chance to speak with you again. So, thank you." The simple sincerity of his words touched something unexpected within Serene, a reminder that beyond the classified operations and high-stakes intelligence work, there remained the fundamental human capacity for growth and recognition. "Your son is serving his country," she replied. "That deserves its own recognition." As the plane accelerated down the runway, lifting into clear blue skies so different from the storm conditions of her previous flights, Serene found herself contemplating the strange symmetry of these encounters. From dismissal to recognition, from suspicion to vindication, from isolation to connection, the journey had come full circle. 6 hours later, as they began their descent into Seattle, Dominic approached with a message from the captain. "Commander, Captain Reynolds would be honored if you'd join him in the cockpit after landing. He served 20 years Navy before commercial aviation, and recognized your name on the manifest." "Please thank the captain," Serene replied, "but I'd prefer to deplane normally." Dominic nodded, understanding. "Of course." When the aircraft reached the gate, Serene gathered her minimal belongings and prepared to exit. As she stepped into the aisle, Wesley stood as well, gesturing for her to proceed ahead of him. "After you, Commander," he said with new respect. As Serene moved toward the exit, something remarkable happened. Dominic had clearly communicated something to the other crew members because they had positioned themselves along the aisle, their posture reflecting understated respect rather than ceremonial attention. The captain stood at the aircraft door, offering not a showy salute, but a simple, dignified nod of professional recognition as she approached. "Thank you for flying with us, Commander Everly," he said quietly. "It's been our honor." "Thank you, Captain," she replied with equal simplicity. As she walked through the jetway into the terminal, Serene reflected on how differently this arrival felt compared to her previous experiences. No surveillance, no suspicion, no need to maintain hypervigilance against potential threats. Just the ordinary journey of a servicewoman returning to her temporary home, carrying the invisible weight of classified knowledge and operational experience that would never be fully known to the civilians around her. And perhaps that was the most important symmetry of all, the recognition that throughout society, unsung individuals carried burdens, performed duties, and made sacrifices that remained largely invisible to those around them. Some wore their service openly in uniforms and insignia. Others, like Serene, operated in shadows and silence. But all were part of the complex tapestry that maintained the safety and security too often taken for granted. As she exited the terminal into the unexpectedly sunny Seattle afternoon, Serene noticed a young woman in civilian clothes waiting near the taxi stand. Their eyes met briefly, the same silent recognition that had passed between them on her previous departure from Washington. Another operator, another mission, another story that would never be told in full. Serene offered a subtle nod, one warrior acknowledging another. The young woman returned the gesture with the barest hint of a smile before turning away, disappearing into the crowd of ordinary travelers, carrying her extraordinary responsibilities with the same quiet dignity that defined those who served in shadows. Some heroes wore uniforms that demanded respect and recognition. Others moved through the world unnoticed, their greatest victories unknown, their sacrifices unsung. Both were essential, both deserving of honor. As Serene continued toward her waiting car, the gold Trident pin secured once more in its proper place within her belongings. She carried with her the certainty that true strength wasn't measured in public acclaim or visible authority, but in the quiet integrity of service rendered without expectation of recognition. Have you ever misjudged someone based on appearances, only to discover hidden depths that changed your perspective completely? Or perhaps you've been on the receiving end of such judgments. The most extraordinary people often walk among us unrecognized, their true capabilities and contributions invisible to casual observation. Share your experiences in the comments below.